At the will reading, they didn't even give me a chair. My son and his wife smiled as the lawyer handed them folder after folder. "You don't have to worry about a thing, Mom," she said, all sugar and silk. But I was worried because I knew Henry and I knew he wouldn't leave me out. Then something changed. A thin man in a faded gray suit stood at the back of the room. He cleared his throat softly and said, "There's one more document." He held up a yellowed envelope sealed and handwritten, Henry's handwriting. My daughter-in-law's smile froze. My son narrowed his eyes, and my youngest turned away. That envelope changed everything. It was the spark that would burn through every carefully built lie, the beginning of a storm they thought would never come, and it all started. I wasn't invited to the meeting about the legacy my husband and I spent 40 years building. I stood just outside the den, close enough to hear their voices, but not close enough to be seen. My son, my daughter, and my daughter-in-law sat at the long oak table flipping through papers like they were flipping through a restaurant menu. They talked about numbers, acreage, transition plans, legalities. No one called for me. No one asked what I thought. My daughter-in-law's voice floated through the airlight and casual. "We've already taken care of all the paperwork," she said. "Mom doesn't need to worry herself. Mom, like I was just a title now, a placeholder." I stepped forward and gently cleared my throat. "Could I at least have a copy of the documents you're discussing?" She looked up at me with that polished, polite smile she always wore when she wanted to shut me out without raising her voice. "That won't be necessary," the attorney said. "Everything's internal. You just need to sign for acknowledgement." For acknowledgement. I looked at my son. He didn't meet my eyes. My daughter turned her face back toward the window like she hadn't heard a thing. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and walked away, my chest tight not with grief, but with something colder, like being erased. That night I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the storage room thinking I'd pull out the old photo album, remind myself of who we used to be. I moved a few boxes aside and heard a soft creak beneath the wooden floorboard. Strange, I tapped it. Hollow. I pried it open, expecting maybe an old flashlight or some forgotten tools. Instead, I found a small wooden box, weathered but sealed tight. Inside was a manila envelope with Henry's handwriting on the front. If you're reading this, it means what I feared has come true. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a fully signed, notarized will, one I'd never seen before, and a letter. Just 5 pages, but I felt like they were burning through my skin. Words written by my husband, not to protect assets, but to protect me, from what I didn't yet understand. But I would. And the moment I closed that box, I knew this wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. 2. The sound of their voices in that meeting kept echoing in my head long after I stepped out of the room. They didn't even realize I'd heard them. Maybe they didn't care. So I walked out to the back porch where the boards still creaked under my steps, just like they had 40 years ago. I sat down on the old wooden swing Henry built the summer after our third child was born, and I let the memories come. Back then, we had nothing but grit and a stubborn kind of faith. The land was dry, the soil was tough, but Henry believed it could grow something beautiful, something bigger than us. And I believed in Henry. We didn't have investors or backup plans, just a small loan, a couple of borrowed tools, and 3 kids in tow. He mapped out the farm on napkins. I balanced the books on a secondhand typewriter after the kids went to bed. He planted ideas in the dirt. I planted them in children. We didn't just raise crops, we raised a community. I still remember the first Saturday class we ever held. A dozen kids from the local town sat on overturned milk crates while Henry taught them about compost and crop rotation. Some of those kids had never seen a tomato plant in their life. I made peanut butter sandwiches for all of them, served out of our own kitchen. One of those kids, Jason, came by the house just last fall. I barely recognized him. He wore a suit, had a job with the USDA now. He hugged me like I was his own grandmother and said, "Ms. Dawson, if it weren't for you and Mr. Henry, I'd still think vegetables came from cans." That moment, it reminded me I wasn't invisible to everyone, just to the ones I thought mattered most. I taught our eldest how to calculate profit margins from our first strawberry harvest. I showed him how to track supply costs and negotiate with vendors. He was bright, eager, curious. I thought I was building a legacy. Now he talks to me like, I don't understand how the world works anymore. He doesn't see a partner in this place. He sees a liability, and the others, well, they go along with it. I try not to blame them, I really do. But sometimes when they hand me tea and pat my hand like I'm a confused old woman, I wonder if they even remember who I used to be. Not just Henry's wife, not just their mother, but the woman who kept the lights on the one who pitched the program to the local Board of Education, who fought for every grant dollar and every scholarship kid we ever took in. I remember one night not long before Henry died. We were sitting on the porch swing just like now. He looked out over the rows of lettuce, the solar panels we'd finally managed to afford the field school we built from scratch. Then he said quietly, I trust the kids. I do, but not the people whispering in their ears. He didn't have to say names. He squeezed my hand and added, if something ever feels wrong after I'm gone, there's a box in the floor of the old supply room. You'll know what to do. I smiled at him that night, thinking he was just being cautious. I didn't realize he was leaving me a lifeline. Now I wonder if he knew exactly what was coming, because sitting here listening to my children talk about the future of this farm like I was never part of its past, I've never felt more alone in my own home. 3. It started with a trip to the bank. I wasn't even thinking about anything major. I just wanted to check the balance on the Rural Education Fund. That account had been sitting there for years, built from donations grants, and Henry's own salary when he was still teaching. We'd used it to cover book seeds and transport for kids who otherwise couldn't afford to learn. I knew the account number by heart. The clerk behind the counter was young, maybe mid-20s. She smiled politely when I handed her the slip of paper, but then her fingers paused over the keyboard. Her smile faltered. I'm sorry, she said gently. This account has been temporarily frozen. It's now under the control of a legal representative, your son, I believe. My stomach dropped. My son, I asked, trying to keep my voice even. That account is in my name. It's for a nonprofit I started. My husband and I, yes, ma'am, I understand, she said quickly, glancing toward the manager. But according to the file, there was a change submitted after your husband's passing. Legal guardianship documentation. It's standard sometimes for elder care, like I was suddenly too fragile to manage my own bank account. I left without saying another word. My hands trembled all the way home, not with fear, but with something colder, a numb kind of betrayal. When I got back, I found my son and his wife sitting at the dining room table going over paperwork. I didn't wait for pleasantries. Why was the scholarship account locked? Why is your name listed as the legal controller? They didn't even flinch. My daughter-in-law stood calm as ever, holding a manila folder in one hand and a steaming cup of tea in the other. She handed me the cup first. Oh, don't worry, Mom, she said with that rehearsed warmth in her voice. It's all been taken care of. You signed the agreement weeks ago at the funeral. You probably don't remember. I don't remember signing anything I said, my voice dry. Well, she said, flipping open the folder you did. We have it right. She paused, then closed it again, just as quickly. Actually, it's just an internal document. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. Really, you should rest more. Stress isn't good at your age. I looked at her, really looked, and in that moment I realized I wasn't being included. I was being managed. I was being ushered out of my own life with smiles and hot tea and soft voices, as if I'd become too much of a burden to be consulted, but not enough of one to confront directly. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't make a scene. I just set the tea down unopened and walked upstairs. My fingers itched to tear through every drawer in the house, every cabinet, every folder, to find what I was missing, what I had apparently given up without even knowing. But I didn't. Not yet. Because something told me this was only the beginning. 4. It was nearly midnight when I heard her voice. I had gotten up for a glass of water, and as I passed by the hallway, I noticed her door slightly ajar. Her voice carried through the quiet of the house, low and sharp. No, seriously, Mom lives out in the middle of nowhere, my daughter said into her phone. She's old. She doesn't need all that land or money. We're the ones working, paying mortgages, raising families. There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. She'd probably give it all away to kids with shovels and tomato seeds, just like before. I stood still just outside her door, my hands tightening around the cool glass. We deserve a future. She's already had hers. I tapped gently on her doorframe. She flinched. Mom. Her phone slipped into her lap. I stepped in, my voice calm but unshakable. I heard what you said. You think I don't deserve my share of your father's estate? She didn't look at me. I'm tired, Mom. You should get some sleep. That was it. No apology, no shame. She turned off the lamp, and I stood in the dim light for a long moment before walking away. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the old desk in Henry's study surrounded by folders and binders we once organized together. I opened the drawer where we kept official records and started pulling documents one after the other. Titles, deeds, power of attorney forms. And that's when I saw it. A document labeled Durable Power of Attorney, signed authorization, dated 3 days after Henry's funeral. I stared at the signature line, my name, except it wasn't. The M was tight and slanted. Mine always curves open like a ribbon. The G was too round, the strokes too clean. It looked like someone imitating my handwriting, someone who practiced just enough to fool a clerk, not a mother. My heart beat louder than the silence in the room. That date, I remember it clearly. I was lying on the living room couch in a haze of grief. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I couldn't even remember if I'd brushed my hair. I barely spoke to anyone. I sure as hell didn't sit down with a lawyer and hand over my life. But there it was, stamped, notarized, filed. According to that form, I had voluntarily transferred all financial and legal authority to my eldest son. And as if that wasn't enough, listed under witness, my daughter-in-law. The air felt thinner in that room. I had to open the window just to breathe. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a rewriting of my existence. They weren't excluding me because I was fragile. They were stripping away my rights quietly, methodically, behind soft smiles and polite tones. A few weeks earlier at the funeral, I remember my daughter-in-law approaching me with a clipboard and pen. Just something small she had said, her voice sweet, too sweet. Some routine paperwork. Mom, we'll take care of the details later. I had signed without reading. My eyes were still swollen from crying. My hands were shaking. Was that it? Was that the moment I looked around the room, Henry's room, and for the first time, I felt like I didn't belong in it anymore. Everything we built was being picked apart behind closed doors, and somehow they were doing it with my name. They hadn't just taken control of the property. They had started erasing me line by line from the story I helped write. And the worst part, they were doing it like it was nothing. 5. It was supposed to be a simple conversation. I asked to see the records for the Dawson Research Fund. That's all. I had been calm. I chose a time when no one was busy. I made tea. I even waited until after breakfast so no one could say I was being difficult again. We sat at the kitchen table, same spot where Henry used to read grant proposals over toast, where I used to balance the books between cooking and correcting homework. But today the table felt like a negotiation battlefield. I want to see the legal documents for the research fund, I said. Ownership, trusteeship, distribution, everything. My son shifted uncomfortably. Mom, it's all been handled. It's legal. You're not listed on it anymore. I blinked. Excuse me, it made sense. He continued, You're not really active with the program anymore. We just streamline things. Before I could speak, my daughter-in-law stood calm and composed and pulled out a file from her neatly labeled folder set. She slid one across the table like it was a menu I didn't order. If you'd like to read through it, you can. It's pretty dense, though. Legal language and all. I opened the file with hands I tried to keep steady. The title on the front page made my stomach tighten. Transfer of Ownership, Dawson Research Fund. I flipped to the second page, and there it was. My signature, or something pretending to be. The M in Margaret didn't loop, right? It curled in on itself like a snail. The G was too round. And the final stroke. My hand never moved like that. It was my name, yes, but not my writing. I stared at the paper in silence. This isn't my signature, I finally said. My voice was quiet but sharp, clear. My daughter-in-law gave a soft, sympathetic smile. You were going through a lot at the time, remember? After the funeral, there were a few things we needed to get signed. You might not remember, but you did sign. I looked up at her. I was in bed for a week after your father died. I barely spoke. I didn't sign anything. She shrugged slightly. Well, it's filed, it's legal. My son kept his eyes on the table. My daughter suddenly found her phone very interesting. I pushed the folder back toward them. You forged my name, I said. No one responded. Who signed this? I demanded. Look at me. Who signed my name? Still nothing, just silence like I was an echo in my own house. It was that silence that broke me more than anything. I stood up. My knees were trembling, but I stayed tall. You didn't just erase me from a document, I said, my voice cracking. You erased me from the very thing I spent half my life building. You used my name to take it all away. No apology, no regret, just a quiet room and the sharp scent of betrayal. I walked out. Back in my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I had hidden Henry's letter. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the last page. If you're reading this, it means what I feared has happened, he'd written. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't risk it. I kept reading, and that's when I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A postscript. Tiny, written in Henry's cramped script. The real will isn't in the safe, it's buried. Remember the apple tree we planted the year Jason was born east side? 3 feet deep. Weatherproof case. If you're here, dig. My breath caught. The apple tree. The one with the crooked branch where we used to hang the tire swing. The same tree where I'd hosted birthday parties, photo shoots, even an outdoor class for kids about seed grafting. I had passed it 1,000 times, never knowing it guarded something sacred. Henry had prepared for this. He saw what I hadn't dared to. I refolded the letter carefully, pressing it against my heart. The pain was still fresh, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just broken anymore. I was awake. They thought I would forget, that I would fade quietly, like an old family photograph no one looks at anymore. But I was still here, and I remembered everything. 6. I didn't go back to the kitchen. I didn't wait for them to explain. The next morning, I packed a small folder, Henry's letter, the forged signature copies, and a flash drive I had barely known how to use until last night. Then I got in my car and drove into town toward a name I hadn't said aloud in years, Ethan Monroe. Ethan had been one of Henry's brightest students back in the early days of our teaching program. He was just a teenager when he first came to our little field school, eager and observant, always asking questions no one else thought to ask. He grew up, went to law school, and became something Henry was always proud of, a man who stood for more than his job title. I hadn't seen him since Henry's funeral. When I walked into his office, he looked up from his laptop with mild confusion, then stood slowly. Mrs. Dawson, I gave him a sad smile. It's Margaret now. I think I need your help. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He just motioned for me to sit close his computer and listened. I laid everything out on the table, every copy, every signature, every thread I had pulled loose over the last week. I told him about the fund, the power of attorney. I never signed the words my daughter had whispered through a cracked door, and finally I handed him Henry's letter. He took his time reading it, flipping through each page with quiet respect. When he reached the end, he looked up at me with something between pain and admiration in his eyes. I remember this handwriting, he said softly. Henry used to write notes on the margins of our lesson plans. Same rhythm, same fire. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He took the documents and stood. Give me a few minutes. He disappeared into another room. I waited in silence, the smell of old carpet and coffee drifting in the air. My hands shook not from fear but from adrenaline. I had waited long enough. I wasn't about to stop now. When Ethan returned, he held a printed sheet in one hand and his phone in the other. This, he said, placing the paper in front of me, is a legally binding notarized copy of Henry's final will. It was submitted to a secure cloud storage platform 3 days before he passed. And this, he turned his phone toward me, showing an email. Subject, open, only if Margaret arrives. From Henry Dawson. Date 2 days before he died. I felt my throat tighten. Ethan tapped the screen. He sent this directly to me. Said if anything ever looked off, and if you ever came to me, this was to be our starting point. I covered my mouth with my hand. In the body of the email was a message, Ethan. If Margaret shows up, something's wrong. I know her. She wouldn't come unless the walls were closing in. If that day comes, give her everything I've stored here. She'll know what to do with it. Protect her the way she always protected us. I broke. I didn't cry at the funeral. I didn't cry when they forged my name, when they stripped me of the fund, when they treated me like a faded memory. But I cried in that office, quiet heaving tears that shook loose something I hadn't let go of in years, the belief that I had to suffer in silence. Ethan let me have my moment. Then he pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and said, "Let's get to work." And we did. Over the next few weeks, I became someone I hadn't been in years, methodical, focused, relentless. I went through every drawer in the house, photographed every document, backed up every file to the cloud. I learned how to record phone calls, how to request bank statements, how to challenge a forged signature in court. I traced paper trails, found inconsistencies, captured conversations that made my stomach turn. In one recording, my daughter-in-law told someone on the phone, "She won't fight us. She's too proud. Besides, who's going to believe an old woman who still uses paper checks?" I saved it. I met with Ethan twice a week, sometimes more. We built a case not out of revenge, but out of truth. I wasn't after their money. I wasn't even sure I wanted the fund back, but I wanted the truth restored. I wanted Henry's legacy respected. And I wanted my name, my real name, not the one they scribbled on a stolen document, to mean something again. It wasn't easy. There were nights I felt overwhelmed, moments when my own children wouldn't return my calls, when I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd lost everything already. But then I'd remember Henry's words. "She'll know what to do." That line played in my mind like a heartbeat, not because I was sure of what came next, but because he had been sure of me. By the end of the month, Ethan had everything he needed to file a formal motion: fraud, misrepresentation, and unlawful control of an estate. We didn't tell them, not yet. I wanted them to look at me one more time and still see someone easy to dismiss. Because when the truth came forward, it wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be undeniable. The courthouse wasn't grand. It was tucked between a post office and a florist with faded blue paint on the outside and flickering fluorescent lights inside. But that day, it felt like the center of my universe. I sat on one side of the courtroom with Ethan beside me. Across the aisle were my son, my daughter-in-law, and my youngest daughter. They didn't look at me. They looked through me. The judge entered a composed woman in her late 60s. She had the kind of posture that made people sit straighter without realizing it. Her voice was steady as she opened the hearing. "Mrs. Margaret Dawson," she said, "you've submitted a petition contesting changes made to the Dawson Research Fund and related estate decisions after the passing of your husband, Mr. Henry Dawson. Please proceed." I stood slowly. My knees were stiff, but my voice was steady. "My husband and I built our life's work together, this land, this community, and this fund. I was removed from it through documents I never saw, decisions I never agreed to, and signatures that weren't mine." I handed over the file to the clerk. Inside, a verified copy of Henry's will, comparisons of my real signature with the forged bank statements, and a timeline of unauthorized changes. Ethan had laid it out clearly and precisely. The judge flipped through the contents. "And this is all verified. Yes, Your Honor." Ethan said, his voice calm but deliberate, including metadata, timestamps, and corroborating witness accounts. He paused, then added, "But there's one more document." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. Across the front was Henry Dawson's unmistakable handwriting. This was given to me personally. Ethan continued with instructions to open only if Margaret ever came to me in distress. He held it up for the judge to see, then carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single note and a flash drive. Ethan glanced toward the screen at the front of the room. "There's also a video," he said quietly. He walked over, inserted the flash drive, and clicked play. The courtroom dimmed slightly as the video began. Henry sat at his desk, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, the green-shaded lamp glowing softly beside him. "If you're seeing this," Henry began, "then I'm not around anymore, and if Margaret is standing in that room, it means something went wrong." He paused. His voice remained calm, but the emotion was there in his eyes. "Margaret is the soul of what we built. I may have planted the seeds, but she was the one who kept them alive." Don't let anyone take this from her, not even the kids, especially not the kids. He leaned forward, eyes locking with the camera. Only trust her. If you're unsure about anything, ask her. Not them, her. The screen went black. The room stayed silent for a long beat. I felt the air shift not dramatically, not with gasps, but with the heavy stillness that comes when truth lands like a weight no one can ignore. The judge cleared her throat. The court acknowledges this video as supplemental evidence of intent and character. She turned to my son. Mr. Dawson, do you contest the validity of your father's statement? He hesitated. I thought we were doing what was best for the family. We didn't think Mom would want to deal with the stress. The judge raised an eyebrow. That's not your decision to make. Did you know the signature wasn't hers? He didn't answer. Then she addressed my daughter-in-law. You witnessed the sign-in of this power of attorney document, correct? Yes, she said, her voice tight. Do you believe the signature to be authentic? I assumed it was. Ethan stood. Your Honor, we have handwriting analysis from 2 independent experts, both confirming the signature is inconsistent with Margaret Dawson's verified writing over the last 20 years. The judge nodded. This matter will be referred for investigation regarding potential fraud and misrepresentation. She turned to my daughter. Ms. Dawson, financial records show you withdrew funds from the Dawson Research Fund shortly after your father's passing. What was the purpose? My daughter's face flushed. I was starting a business, a sustainable home goods startup. I thought it would honor their legacy. You did not have legal authorization. I know, she whispered. I was desperate. There was no excuse. Not really. But there was regret in her voice, or maybe just fear. The judge turned to me again. Mrs. Dawson, what outcome are you seeking today? I stood. I don't want punishment, I said. I want restoration. I want the truth made clear. I want my husband's legacy to mean something. I want my name back, not just on paper, but in principle. The judge leaned back in her chair. This court recognizes the validity of the original will, the improper transfer of authority, and the unlawful use of estate funds. All changes made to the Dawson Research Fund posthumously are hereby nullified. She paused. Mrs. Dawson, control of the fund is restored to you. Further proceedings regarding misconduct will be handled separately. It was done. As we walked out, the sun had just broken through the clouds. I didn't look back at them, my children. I didn't need to. Some things can't be fixed in one afternoon. Some fractures run deeper than any court ruling can reach. But I walked out of that building with my name intact. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged to my life again. 8. After the hearing, I didn't move back into the main house. I chose the small cottage on the edge of the orchard instead. The one Henry used to use as a writing retreat when the farm was full of noise and questions. It felt right. Quiet, purposeful. I didn't throw anyone out. I could have. Legally, I had every right, but I didn't want revenge. I wanted reflection. So I let them stay, my son, his wife, even my daughter, though she barely looked at me those first few days. Instead of confrontation, I left them with one sentence. I hope you learn how to be human again, the way your father tried to teach you. They didn't respond. That was okay. Some truths take time to land. I poured my energy back into what mattered most, reviving the program Henry and I started decades ago. The garden plots had been overrun with weeds, the tools rusted, the storage shed warped with time. But the spirit of the place was still there. Beneath every cracked stone, beneath every faded sign, the soil still remembered what it meant to grow. So we started again. Every Tuesday and Thursday, children from town came in small groups. Some didn't know the difference between a seed and a pebble. Some had never touched dirt. But they came curious, cautious, and eager, and I taught them not just how to plant, how to observe, how to wait, how to lose something and try again. I wore Henry's old gardening gloves patched and too big for my hands, and told stories as I taught. They listened wide-eyed like I was a character out of a book, but I wasn't a story. I was proof that a life torn down could still be rebuilt row by row, root by root. Inside the small classroom we refurbished together, I hung a frame scan of the letter Henry left me. Not the whole thing, just one sentence written in his jagged, stubborn handwriting. If you're reading this, then we still have a chance to plant again from the start. That sentence stopped more people in their tracks than any lecture I ever gave. I still read it sometimes when no one's around. Not because I need reassurance, but because I like to imagine Henry sitting beside me again, whispering, "See, you knew what to do." I don't know if my children will ever come around. I don't know if they'll understand what they almost destroyed, but I'm not waiting anymore. They chose silence. I chose legacy. And maybe that's the difference between losing something and letting it go. If someone you loved ever questioned your worth, if they stripped you of your place, your name, your dignity, not because you were wrong, but because you were older, quieter, or simply inconvenient, would you stay silent, or would you stand up not to fight them, but to find yourself again? Tell me, because the truth is, I didn't reclaim this land for control. I reclaimed it so the next seed wouldn't be buried under someone else's fear. And maybe that seed is yours.